Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I am Ghadi Francis. This is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates, stories and news from the region that I call my home, West Asia. Today our top story is from Palestine. From the outside, it might look like another Ramadan, another round of clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque. But for the people of Palestine, Israeli forces stormed into the second holiest site in Islam as worshippers gathered to pray. This has become some kind of a template year after year. What does it look like to live there? We bring you this story from the biggest news in West Asia this week. Let's take a look. It was in the pre-dawn hours. Palestinians were just going to break their morning fast. But the Israeli police had other plans. They stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The worshippers narrate a story of thrashing, assault and suffocation. They say occupiers punished them for the simple act of praying. Israel says its security forces were forced to enter the prayer halls because some quote-unquote agitators barricaded themselves inside the mosque. They point to a rule that worshippers cannot stay inside the mosque overnight during Ramadan.
I was praying and I was sitting on a chair, reciting the Quran. The Israeli police hurled stun grenades. One of them hit my chest. Now my family will see me and they will feel terrible.
Soon, videos emerged of Israeli forces beating worshippers. The word spread. Protests broke out in the West Bank. But the raid continued till morning. Palestinian Red Crescent says Israeli forces prevented its medics from reaching Al-Aqsa. That day alone, 400 Palestinians were arrested. Tensions have spiraled since. Missiles, protests, and West Bank shooting. This is a religious site holy to three different religions. For the Muslims, it is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. For Jews, it is the Temple Mount. And for Christians, it is Mount Moriah. This is also a really sensitive time. Palestinians are celebrating Ramadan and have to visit the site for prayers. It's also Passover for Jews and Easter for Christian Palestinians. Tensions are always brewing in this compound. A long conflict that involves history, geography, and above all, religion. Unfortunately, these flare-ups have become a yearly affair. This is what happened in 2022. Israeli police raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque and arrested hundreds of Palestinian worshippers. More than 100 people were left injured in the scuffle. The year also came to be known as the deadliest year in the conflict's recent history. A year earlier, it was the same story, maybe even worse. What started as protests against Sheikh Jarrah evictions soon turned into a full-blown war. At least 256 Palestinians, including 66 children and 40 women, were killed, and 13 people died in Israel. In 2020, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was closed for Muslim worshippers due to the pandemic. Israeli soldiers fired tear gas and rubber-coated rounds on Muslim worshippers. Many were injured, including a Palestinian member of Israel's Knesset. Nationalist and religious politicians demanded that Jews should visit the holy compound. The clashes arise because Israel and Palestine follow different rule books. The status quo says only Muslims can pray there. Non-Muslims can only visit. And a committee by Jordan is supposed to control this access. But since Israel controls East Jerusalem, it also controls the Al-Aqsa mosque. So ultimately, the Israeli police decide who has access and who does not. They have completely rejected Jordan's committee and are openly targeting Palestinian worshippers.
We have no intention of changing the status quo on the Temple Mount. We are calling for calming the situation and we will take strong action against extremists who use violence there.
This region is known to be volatile. It is always just a flare-up away from a war. One clash, one episode of exchange of fire, and before you know it, a war has broken out. Peace talks, two-state solution, UN brokered deals, everything has failed. What lives on are the seeds of the conflict, fertile ground for hostilities, decades of trauma, and an uncertain future. From Saudi Arabia to Turkey elections and much more, we have a lot lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But let's take a look at what's making the headlines.
Israel responds to rocket fire from Lebanese soil, strikes Gaza and southern Lebanon, at least 2 killed in occupied West Bank. The foreign ministers of rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia meet in Beijing. Tehran says it will pave the way for normalized ties under a China brokered deal. A Saudi Arabian-led military coalition has lifted 8-year-old restrictions on imports headed for Yemen's southern ports as moves towards peace continue. Kurdish Prime Minister Masroor Barzani hired Johnny Depp's lawyer for defamation case by Kurdish American female activist. Courtrooms today. Syrian refugee becomes mayor of German village of Ostelzheim. He sought refuge after civil war forced him to flee the war-torn country.
At a time when economies around the world are grappling with high oil prices, OPEC Plus announced fresh cuts to oil production, a move that caught everyone off guard. Now the group justifies its decision with market stability. The United States says the world needs lower oil prices for economic growth. But we ask, does the world need it or does the West need it? We tell you more.
Whoever controls the oil controls much more than oil. Words famously spoken by US Senator John McCain. But what does this mean in the world we are living? Well, it defines what we are seeing around us. From where you are sitting right now, do you see any kind of plastic, clothing, or medicines? They all contain petroleum products derived from crude oil. And do you know who controls this oil? Only 13 countries out of a total of 195. They hold 80% of the world's proven oil reserves. These countries form OPEC, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries. It was formed in Baghdad in 1960 by Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Then eventually became the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. They were to become the founder members of the organization. The aim was to decide the world's market, who should produce how much oil, how much of it should flow into the market, and most importantly, at what price. This week, OPEC Plus decided to cut their oil production to 3.66 million barrels per day. This is 3.7% of global demand. The announcement caught the world off guard. Oil prices rose $5 per barrel, putting them at above the $85 per barrel mark. Voluntary cuts will start from the 1st of May and are set to continue until the end of 2023. Many were still struggling with the earlier production cuts. The new move comes on top of the October cuts. OPEC Plus had agreed then on output cuts of 2 million barrels per day. So who will fill this production gap? Definitely not Russia. EU leaders blocked most Russian oil imports by the end of 2022. It was their reaction to the invasion of Ukraine. So Russia did two things. One, it started selling more crude to India and China. And two, it became an ally of the OPEC. So this new production cut will be complied with by Russia as well. Russian Deputy Prime Minister said the West is facing a crisis because of its own interference with market dynamics. A Russian expression often used to describe the Western price cap on oil. The cuts have had an expected reaction. Fresh fears of banking crisis have erupted. Investors are selling out risk assets. And the West is unhappy, especially the US. Washington has called it inadvisable. Joe Biden is going one step further. He is considering passing a legislation known as NOPEC, which basically aims to seize OPEC's assets on US territory. The oil-rich countries have hit Washington where it hurts the most. And Biden is still living under the illusion that what hurts the US hurts the world.
Saudi Arabia, a country that was called a pariah by the United States of America, is coming back for its throne in West Asia. After years of war, the country under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is giving peace a chance. Is it vested interest, or could it shape the future of the region? Let's take a look.
In the years since Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman came to power, it has been hard to find any major development in West Asia that does not somehow involve the 37-year-old. Prince Mohammed's rise accelerated in 2015. Even the Saudis had hardly heard about the man. But after his father, King Salman, appointed him as Deputy Crown Prince, everything changed. That year saw Mohammed plunge Saudi Arabia into a military campaign in Yemen, a civil war that grew into a regional proxy battle and continues till date. If we talk about Yemen, Riyadh supports the exiled government, and the Houthi rebels who hold Sana'a are unhappy with that. Speaking of Houthis, let's talk about Iran. Tensions with Tehran have always been latent. At the time MBS took over, Iran was still in the JCPOA nuclear deal. But the crisis deepened after the execution of a prominent Shiite cleric in 2016. Protesters stormed Saudi diplomatic posts in Iran, and Riyadh broke off ties with Tehran. The same year, the prince made an attempt to break Hezbollah's influence in the Lebanese government. Prime Minister Saad Hariri visited the kingdom, but what unfolded was not expected by anyone. We can't be sure of the crown prince though. He allegedly forced Hariri to announce his resignation. The attempt failed, and Saudi Arabia's influence in Lebanon ended. But an attack that followed likely changed the prince's calculations. In September 2019, a barrage of cruise missiles and drones struck the kingdom's oil industry. It temporarily halved the production. It is still not clear who the perpetrators were. over the years, as geopolitics took its course, also emerged the de facto ruler of the world's leading oil exporter, Mohammed bin Salman. Today, he's managed to walk the impossible tightrope, get praise from Western leaders, and even solve the biggest issues in West Asia, from easing hostility with long-estranged Iran, re-establishing ties with Syria, to ending the kingdom's years-long war in Yemen. MBS is pivoting Saudi Arabia towards peace. And after oil, diplomacy is his new tool. Prince Mohammed understood that it does not need the United States to shape the West Asian politics. And China has proved this to be true. The Crown Prince even hosted Russia's Vladimir Putin. We're yet to see whether the Saudi prince's vision will translate into a success. But if it does, it will not only reshape the kingdom's future, but also have a profound impact on the wider West Asia. Let's look into the future. The kingdom is staring at a transition. King Salman is already 87. Prince Mohammed will likely become the youngest ever to take the throne. Imagine if he can wield so much absolute power as the crown prince. What should you expect from a king?
Turkish elections are just around the corner. But these elections are very challenging for Recep Tayyip Erdogan's 20-year reign. It could make or break. From corruption to dwindling economy to the aftermath of the earthquakes. But it looks like his fate is taking an ironic twist. It might be dependent on the breakaway of a candidate and a party long felt sidelined in Turkish politics. Who are we talking about? We tell you.
Lider Cumhurbaşkanımız Recep Tayyip Erdoğan.
Türkiye is soon going to hold its presidential and parliamentary elections, and the aftermath of two deadly earthquakes are expected to have a ripple effect.
70 değerli isimler
Recep Tayyip Erdogan's mismanagement, corruption, and priorities lay bare with the debris. But it's not just the shift in Earth's tectonic plates, but also the political one. Even before the earthquake, Turkey had been facing stiff headwind for a number of years. So much so that many experts believe Erdogan has overstayed his welcome. He has been hanging over Turkish politics and society for 20 long years. For the first time ever, he is lagging behind in opinion polls ahead of national election. But this does not mean that he is surely going to lose in the coming election. Erdogan still enjoys a comfortable reservoir of supporters. But he is staring at nothing less than an irony. A minority group that has long felt sidelined in Turkish politics are emerging as a kingmaker. The Kurdish minority in Turkey makes up about 18% of the 85 million population. Yet, their votes will be pivotal this time. Erdogan was hopeful that the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party would field their own candidate. What that would have done is splinter the voting basis. But in March, they refused to do so. Even though the HDP has not joined the six-party coalition, the move does raise the prospect of the opposition uniting against Erdogan's re-election bid.
tek adam gitsin, başka bir tek adam gelsin değildir. Tek adam
This man, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, is challenging the incumbent. At 74 years old, he is heading the Republican People's Party, or CHP.
açık ve net ifade edeyim. Hiç kimse, hiçbir güç
He has been doing so for the last 13 years. Latest polls show 40% of people are happy with his presidential candidature. The opposition is hoping to capitalize on the anger against Erdogan. And for the first time in 2 decades, their chances are looking fair. Yet, polls indicate Kılıçdaroğlu will fall short of a simple majority that is needed to clinch the race in the first round. This is where the Kurdish party comes in. In Turkey, it is believed that no party that does not receive the support of Kurdish voters has ever come to power. And in this election, HDP's supporters are being seen as a crucial swing vote. But the two sides don't exactly see eye to eye. Kılıçdaroğlu's electoral alliance includes right-wing and religious parties, and they have declined to formally embrace the HDP. But could an anti-Erdogan rhetoric bring them together? The May 14th election will answer that.
And now, for the end of this edition of the West Asia Post, we go to one of the most beautiful nations of this region, a war-ravaged nation, Yemen. Amid the unending war, there are some communities that are trying to preserve decades-old traditions. Tazi is a local cheese in Yemen. It is preferred by many people over the commercial one. Once you take a look at the intricate process of making this cheese, you might also change your mind. Let's take a look.
And we inherited this industry from our fathers and grandfathers. It is in this particular region where we make these kinds of cheese, and our incomes are derived from this industry. It is our primary job, and we try to preserve it as much as possible.
In order to preserve this industry, efforts should be intensified to preserve it. For example, the governorate has to provide large-size refrigerators and modern machines for manufacturing and packaging to maintain their validity for a longer period.
That's all we have for you for this week on the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, always bringing you the most recent news, stories, updates and ground reports from the most volatile region in the world. Until then, stay safe. Happy Easter for those celebrating, happy Ramadan for those celebrating, and for everyone else, we see you next week. I'm Ghadi Francis, signing off from Beirut, Lebanon. Keep on watching WION, World is One.